I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown on the important key toss-up, interesting, whatever, close Senate races, the most important ones going forward. But before I do start, please consider subscribing. I'm almost at 300 subscribers. If you are new, please do subscribe, share this video, share my channel with everybody you know, and help me hopefully reach 300 and then maybe, if I'm lucky, 500 subscribers by the midterms, which are now only 11 days away. So again, back into the video, I'm going to be doing a bit of a closer look, a more of a deep dive at each of the important key races left in the Senate. I just did my overall prediction the other day, but I'm going to look a little closer and talk about each of the important races, at least a few of them anyway. So starting off, we have Arizona. As you can see, Kelly is currently leading by 1.5 points average. That margin has gotten much closer as of late. A poll that was tied, 1.2 point Kelly. As you can see, it has gotten closer. If we look here, the margins generally were higher for Kelly going forward. So assuming trends generally continue, we can say that Kelly will probably get even further out from victory, and that overall Masters will probably get a bit closer. And realistically, at the end of the day, I would say will pick up the seat, as RCP even projects it will be picked up. And then if you look here, the GOP has been underestimated since 2016 to 2020 in polls by 1.4 points, which puts it at only 0.1 Kelly. So, assuming we take that into account, and the fact that polling continues to get closer and closer for Mark Kelly and Blake Masters, I do think that we can see, like I said, this state will probably be in a lean tilt column, but I think lean, obviously. Now, the next state we have coming up, we have Nevada. Nevada, I'm going to be putting it as lean as well. As I've shown earlier, Laxalt is ahead by 1.2 points. Now, he'd be further ahead if it weren't for this one registered voter poll, which honestly should be completely disregarded as it is, because it's a registered voter poll 11 days from the election. And of course, that one has Masto ahead. The rest have Laxalt ahead by much larger margins. And again, GOP pickup by RCP. And again, this is one of the few states where Democrats are actually underestimated in polling. So, yeah, it shows, oh, well, 0.5 for Masto if we look right here, if we look at the underestimated, but that's also considering a poll that had Masto ahead and it was a registered voter poll that should not have been included. So we take that into account. Realistically, at the end of the day, Nevada will go red. Easily, Laxalt wins that. Now, we also have Pennsylvania. This one has gotten very interesting. This one's very close with a recent insider advantage poll that has just come out, showing Oz ahead by 3 points, which is huge. It's good to see that Oz has been gaining, and it's no surprise after the last debate where we saw Fetterman completely collapse and do just as bad as everyone expected. So, at the end of the day, Oz will win this, and then you have to consider how much the polls underestimate the Republicans, and that's by 4.2 points, which is huge, which actually puts Oz at a 3.9 lead in the polls, which very well gives him a lean margin, which many thought was not going to happen. Many at first were thinking, oh, well, Fetterman's going to win. No, he's not. And on top of this, we also had a lot of early voting results, or whatever, not results, but by registration, we see Republicans are doing much better in early voting than was expected. It's looking quite a bit closer, just overall by party registration. So we take that into account, and then we include election day voting. Republicans very well could do much better than people actually expect, and I do think they will. So moving on from Pennsylvania, we have Georgia. This one has been very interesting. There's been some scandals, some issues Walker's faced, and yet despite that, and everyone's saying he's a horrible candidate, he has managed to continue to control the lead. At least recently, he's managed to fight through all the adversity, and he currently has the lead. And again, in this state, Republicans have been underestimated by about 1.4 points, giving Walker a 2-point lead. Now, obviously, this state has runoffs, so Georgia, at the end of the day, probably will end up going to a runoff, and I think Walker wins it in the runoff. But again, end of the day, it won't be an outright victory, but I think Walker will win it within a lean margin. Another thing to consider with this is just how uncommon vote splitting really is in the state of Georgia compared to other states. And with Kemp currently polling much further ahead, around 10 points or so. I just don't see it likely at all that Walker doesn't get a higher vote margin than this. Realistically, I'd say he probably gets at least similar to what the Rasmussen poll has. I'd say probably closer to a 5-point lead over Warnock. Now, Warnock will probably get a little more, probably I'd say 45, and I think it's possible Walker could potentially break the 50 and avoid the runoff, but it's unlikely. Now, moving on from Georgia, we have New Hampshire. This one's interesting. This one, in my last prediction at first, I hadn't put it in the Republican column, but looking a bit closer at it now and just doing a bit of research, I'm leaning towards putting it in a Republican flip for Don Bolduc, someone who I didn't think was capable of winning, now very well could win. As you can see, Bolduc is leading by 1 if you actually look at the underestimating by polling. Currently, Hassan has a 3.4 lead. The polls have gotten consistently closer recently as well. 3.4 lead, and then if we consider that the GOP has been underestimated by 4.4%, consistently, we actually see Bolduc ahead. Now, this is interesting because Bolduc, of the candidates running at the time in the Republican primary, I thought was the least likely of the two to win. But he's showing that may not be the case. As we can see, it was much, much further apart at first. It was quite far apart, actually. It had Hassan winning by upwards of safe margins in some polls. Now, obviously, polls are pretty crappy and inaccurate most of the time, and a lot of these were registered voter polls, but it has gotten closer. And credit where it's due, Bolduc very well could win this. So at this point, I actually would put New Hampshire in a flip for Republicans, and that gives them the Senate right there. But there are obviously a few more seats to look at. We have North Carolina. Now this one, we pretty much said it was safe. Recent poll, just most polling data recently has shown very, very, very handily that Bud will win this, and Sherry Beasley has no chance. There's really never been a point where she had a chance. Like there's this point here where she was within almost 2 points, but even then, she really isn't. And as you can see, the polling generally has just gotten better as we've gone on. Registered voter polls have been taken out. At the end of the day, this race easily, I'd say, could almost be safe. Again, GOP has been underestimated by about 4.5 points in the state. Again, only 11 days out. If polling trends continue, if Republicans continue to gain with the momentum they seem to have right now, and the fact that Democrats are just not winning on any important issues anymore, it would be impressive if they could manage to pull off a few of these seats, because they really have just screwed themselves so bad. It's impressively bad. So at the end of the day, I do actually agree that Bud could win this by 9 to even 10 points. And that would make North Carolina at least likely, potentially safe, if these trends continue. Now, moving on, we also have the state of Wisconsin. This one's pretty easy to say what was going to happen. Easily, it's a GOP hold. RCP is correct in this. If we look at past elections, which I will show you in a minute, it just makes no sense that Johnson wouldn't win. There was a point where Barnes was ahead by 5.5 points. Wasn't going to happen. And now, by 3.3 points, Johnson is leading with over 50% of actual support. And then in the state, Wisconsin consistently underestimates the GOP by about 4 points, giving Johnson a 7.3 lead, which would be a likely margin, which I do think will be the actual result in the state. This is the other thing to look at. If we look at the former Senate race in the state, 2016, Ron Johnson versus Russ Feingold. Do you see this polling? This polling right here. This had Feingold ahead the entire time, and at the end of the day, 2.7. But Johnson won it by 3.4. So the polls were off by over 5 points, which is a large margin, very large margin. And this has consistently been the case. I'm fairly certain 2016 or 2010 Senate between Johnson and Feingold. Johnson, he was actually polling better here. So polling was more accurate in 2010. But this is the thing. At the time it was. In 2016, it was drastically off. And then they even had it as a lean Dem. But Feingold lost, Johnson won. And right now, with how favorable the environment really is for Republicans and just how bad Democrats have screwed up, how little of an issue or a platform they have to run on anymore that is actually popular, they really don't have any chance. Like, if you really consider it, you think about it, you look at these races. What do Democrats have to campaign on? COVID is like the last thing they're still trying to campaign on, and it's just a dead horse issue. There's no reason to keep going back to it because nobody supports it anymore. They're so sick of the crap that they did to them for freaking 2.5 years. You really think that's going to help them? No, it's not going to help. It's just going to continue to hurt them. And Roe versus Wade, the abortion issue, is almost a non-issue at this point because the few people who are actually energized to vote about it on the left make up such a small portion of the voting block, it won't matter. And then the people who are most enthused to vote as a result of any abortion issue are actually pro-life Republicans. So at the end of the day, it's not helping Democrats as much as they thought it would, and it really didn't become this Roe wave that they were claiming it was going to be. Now we move on to Ohio. Ohio is a very important state here. Vance is ahead by 2.2 points. Overall, a recent single poll had him ahead by 5. Now, polling has not been amazing in the state of Ohio ever. It really never has. I believe it had Joe Biden winning in the, here, we'll look at the polling. Trump only had polling of 1 point. They had him ahead by 1 point. And for many, many months, they had Joe Biden ahead. So basically, they massively underestimated this one by 7.2 points. The RCP average was off by 7.2 points in the state of Ohio. Now, currently, assuming that's the case, that would give Vance a 9-point lead. And I don't think Vance will underperform Trump. It just doesn't make any sense. And then if, again, you look, polls underestimating GOP by 6.7 points, it shows Vance at an 8.9, almost 9-point lead, which very well I do think will be very close to the actual margin. I think it will be safe in a probably 10 to 10.5 margin, and it will be a GOP hold. Moving on, we also have Colorado. This one, unfortunately, I don't think is winnable for Republicans, Bennett and OD. OD being a very wishy-washy kind of rhino-type Republican if he wins, but it would still be better than Bennett a little bit. At the end of the day, Republicans don't really have a chance to win this state. It's like, unfortunately, it won't be the case in the Senate. It was pretty accurate with their polling in 2020. I just don't see Republicans winning. It could get close. It'll be probably a likely margin for Dems, but Republicans, unfortunately, I don't think can win it. And then lastly, we have the state of Washington, the last one that for a short period looked like, oh, it might have been close, it was within 6 points, but now 8.5 points. Polling trends generally seem to be sort of accurate in the state of Wisconsin, or not Wisconsin, Washington. I don't think Tiffany Smiley can win it. She's kind of a better candidate than some. She's still more establishment-y than many, more than I'd like, but in the state of Washington, you kind of have to have that to be able to win, so I'm not really complaining about that, but unfortunately, I just don't see her winning it, and I would also put that in a likely Democrat state, giving the final result a 54 to 46 margin for Republicans, Democrats with only 46, and that would mean a guaranteed majority for Republicans, and then going forward, potentially bigger by 2024. So that was the breakdown. That is a overall deeper dive look at the polling, the trends, what the past polling trends as well showed, and how I think the results and why each state will go Republican in the midterms 11 days from now. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, comment, let me know what you think about the Senate elections, who you think will win, and lastly, again, as I said, subscribe, share this video with everyone you know so more people can find it, and hopefully I can reach 300 subscribers and then 500 subscribers before the midterms. Anyways, that's all for now. Good night.